The human ship drifted quietly in orbit around Xyrathal's homeworld, a planet that glimmered with strange blue-green oceans and towering crystalline cities. Elia's ward, the human envoy, had expected tension. First contact with a species as advanced and proud as the Xyrathalans was always tense. What he did not expect was to find himself suddenly alone in a room that seemed to have a mind of its own, and under the watchful gaze of the alien queen herself. "The door is locked," she said, her voice like the calm hum of a strange engine. "You will stay in my room tonight, human." His mind raced, calculating escape routes, communication protocols, and emergency contingencies. He had trained for hostile encounters, ambushes, and traps, but nothing in the military or diplomatic manuals had prepared him for being voluntarily, or involuntarily, locked in a room with a sovereign of an alien empire. The door behind him shimmered slightly, a subtle hum vibrating through the metal floor. Elias pressed his hand against it. It was solid, impervious to his attempts to override the lock with human tools. Even his communicator failed. He could send nothing, receive nothing. He was completely isolated. Xyrathal observed him with eyes that were both beautiful and terrifying, large and reflective like pools of liquid silver. Her form was tall, elegant, and covered in iridescent scales that changed color with her mood. Even the slightest flicker of her gaze carried authority and power. Yet despite her intimidating presence, there was curiosity in the tilt of her head, in the way she regarded him. Elias straightened his shoulders and held her gaze. "I assume this is a test," he said, careful to keep his voice steady. "If it is, I will comply." Humans are often so predictable. Fear, anger, desperation, you show none of these. Intriguing. Elias noticed the way the light reflected off her scales, creating patterns that almost seemed alive. He took a breath and reminded himself to remain calm. Panic would accomplish nothing. "You will remain here until the cycle ends," Xyrathal said, motioning toward the room itself. "No door will open, no guard will intervene. This is not punishment, human, it is observation. To see what your kind is truly made of." There were no windows, no obvious furniture, yet the space did not feel hostile. It felt controlled, intentional, like a stage prepared for an experiment. He sat on the floor carefully, crossing his legs. He needed to think, to plan his approach to this unusual situation. Panic, fear, or aggression would only confirm whatever assumptions the Queen had about humans. Instead, he would observe, adapt, and act with patience. Hours passed in quiet. Xyrathal did not leave. She moved through the room with grace, sometimes observing him from the distance, sometimes stopping to watch him closely. Every gesture seemed deliberate, and Elias realized that even the air, the light, and the faint hum beneath the floor were part of her observation. The room itself was an extension of her will. "You do not react as expected," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Most species show fear or anger when trapped. You endure. Why?" The color of her scales shifted subtly from silver to a deep violet. "Persistence," she murmured. "Curious, you do not fight, yet you do not flee, you simply exist. Observing, learning, perhaps that is your power. But when the time comes, we use it." "You speak of humans with admiration," she said, more a statement than a question. "Yet you are small, fragile, fleeting. How do you dare to face a sovereign of your empire without fear?" "Some comes from knowing what must be done, even if it is dangerous, even if it is impossible. I have seen humans before, of course, but never one like you. Never one who does not break under pressure. Tell me, how do you endure this night, knowing there is no escape?" Yet he also realized that it was safe. Nothing here was meant to harm him physically, only mentally. "I endure," he said finally, "because that is what humans do. We find strength in the impossible. We learn, we adapt, we survive. Fear is natural, but it does not control us. It only teaches us what we must overcome." Then she stepped back, her form towering once again. "You may be the first human I have met who does not fear the night, the unknown, or the impossible," she said. "Perhaps there is more to your species than I imagined." He observed the subtle shifts in the Queen's expression, the way her gaze lingered on him with curiosity rather than authority. He began to sense that this night would not end with punishment, nor with anger, but with understanding. Perhaps this encounter was not a test of strength, but a test of spirit. At times, the Queen asked questions, probing his mind with stories of her empire, its power, and its fragility. Elias answered honestly, without arrogance, without deceit. He spoke of humanity's history, of wars and alliances, of failures and triumphs. He spoke of resilience, of cooperation, and of the human capacity to endure against impossible odds. Xyrathal listened, fascinated. Every word, every story challenged her assumptions about this fragile species she had once thought inconsequential. For all their physical limitations, humans possessed a depth of will and courage she had not expected. As the cycle of the planet passed outside, the room remained locked, yet it no longer felt like a prison. Ilias realized that the Queen's intent was not to confine him, but to understand him, and through him understand humanity. And in that understanding he saw an opportunity, not to escape, not to fight, but to teach and to show the value of his kind. By the time the first faint light of the planet's dawn filtered through the walls, Ilias had learned much about Xyrathal and she about him. There was no hostility left between them, only observation, reflection, and a subtle, unspoken respect. And though the door remained locked, Ilias Ward was no longer afraid. He was ready. Ready to endure the night, ready to meet the Queen as an equal, ready to show that humanity, though small and fragile, possessed a spirit that could not be contained. The room remained quiet after the first faint light of the planet's dawn. Ilias Ward had expected the Queen to continue testing him, but Xyrathal did not move immediately. She seemed lost in thought, her silver eyes reflecting patterns of the pale walls as if she were reading the room itself. Ilias, though tense, allowed himself to observe her in return. The human mind, he thought, learns through observation. Perhaps this was a lesson the Queen had yet to understand. "You speak with honesty," she said finally, her voice soft and careful, almost as if testing the words in the air before she let them exist. "I hear humans speak of strength in spirit, of courage in impossible circumstances. But why do you not act out of fear, as others would? Humans survive because we think, not because we act blindly. Humans are capable of much when forced to confront what they do not understand. Fear often hides power, but it does not define it." He wondered if she had designed it to test him, or if it was a natural extension of her species' intelligence. "You are unusual," she said. "Even now I sense a mind that refuses to break. Most of my guests, most of my subjects would be trembling, pleading, or trying to flee. You—" her voice trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. "I do not flee," Ilias said simply. "It is pointless. It does not change the circumstances. It does not gain anything. The only value is in understanding, in observation, in learning from what is happening, and perhaps in teaching others what we learn." Yet in that gaze there was something new, something unfamiliar even to one as powerful as she was. Curiosity, genuine curiosity. "You speak of teaching me," she said. "And yet you are locked in this room. You have no power, no control over your circumstances. How can you teach?" He allowed himself to relax slightly, though he remained alert. "Teaching is not always about control," he said. "Sometimes it is about example. By enduring, by staying calm, by thinking clearly, humans can show value without forcing it. That is the essence of diplomacy, the essence of leadership, even the essence of survival." "We are often underestimated," he said. "Others assume weakness, small size, short lives mean little power, but strength comes in many forms: patience, intelligence, adaptation, and sometimes endurance alone is enough to change the outcome." Ilias observed the room, noting the subtle shifts in light and air, the gentle vibrations that responded to Xyrathal's movements. He realized the room itself was a part of the observation, as if the Queen's presence extended into the very environment. He could feel it, like a current under the skin, but not harmful, merely watchful. "You speak confidently of humanity," the Queen said after a long pause. "Yet I have studied your species. You are prone to war, to destruction, to failure. How do you claim such endurance when history shows so much loss?" "Every failure is a lesson. Every obstacle is an opportunity. We adapt, we cooperate, we persist. That is why we reach the stars. That is why we survive. Perhaps I have underestimated the value of endurance. And that is why we endure where others fall." The room remained locked, but the tension that had accompanied the initial encounter was gone. Instead, there was focus, observation, mutual recognition. Ilias felt a strange sense of calm. He realized that the night was no longer about confinement, but about connection, an understanding that transcended species, language, and culture. "You have shown patience," Xyrathal said finally, breaking the silence. "I expected panic, anger, perhaps defiance. Instead, you show calm observation and reasoning. This is rare, even among my most trusted allies. Fear is natural, but it does not control us. The choice is ours. Even when circumstances are fixed, even when options are limited, the mind remains free. That is what humans endure, what humans survive, what humans teach. Ilias realized the environment was part of her test, and yet it no longer mattered. He had learned to adapt to its presence, to remain calm and observant. "You are unusual," she said finally. "I expected a creature of instinct, easily frightened or angered. Instead, I find one who thinks, who observes, who adapts. This may be the first time I have truly understood a human." "Understanding is the first step to respect," he said. "Fear and aggression are easy. Observation and endurance are hard, but they last longer, they endure." Perhaps there is value in endurance, even in a species so small and fleeting. And in that choice I see power. Not the power of weapons, not the power of control, but something I have rarely witnessed, the power of spirit. That is our strength. Hours passed, the cycle of the planet moving steadily outside, but inside the room, time felt suspended. Ilias and Xyrathal shared no more words for a while, but both were aware of the presence of the other, of the thoughts exchanged, of the lessons learned. By the end of the cycle, Ilias knew one thing clearly. The night was far from over, but the initial test had ended. The Queen had begun to see humanity as he did. Not fragile, not weak, but capable of endurance, adaptation, and subtle strength that even the most powerful empire could not ignore. And in that quiet understanding, Ilias Ward realized that the night ahead would not be about fear or confinement or dominance. It would be about connection, learning, and the slow, steady revelation of human resilience in a universe that underestimated it. The room had grown quieter as the night deepened, the pale walls now reflecting the soft glow of the planet's distant stars. Ilias Ward remained seated, alert and composed, though fatigue tugged at his muscles. Hours of conversation with the alien queen had revealed a great deal about her curiosity, her assumptions, and the way she measured power. Yet he had begun to suspect that the true nature of this night had not yet fully revealed itself. Xyrathal remained standing, a motionless figure against the soft lighting, her silver scales shifting between hues of violet and deep blue. Ilias noticed a subtle tension in the way she held herself. She had observed him closely, watching his reactions, his calm composure, his patience. But now her movements became more deliberate, more purposeful. "You have endured the night well," she said finally, her voice calm but commanding. "But endurance alone does not reveal all. There is a trial you must face, human, though you may not yet understand it." Her gaze moved across the room, and the walls seemed to shimmer, faint ripples forming as if the surface were liquid. Ilias' heart rate increased slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. The room itself had begun to change. The floor hummed more loudly, a subtle vibration that Ilias felt through the soles of his feet. The air shifted, becoming heavier yet breathable. Light flickered, creating illusions of depth and movement along the walls. Then, without warning, the chamber itself seemed to expand and contract, as if the space were breathing, alive with purpose. Ilias took a deep breath, reminding himself of the lessons of patience, observation, and endurance. He had faced the Queen's scrutiny, he had remained calm under her gaze, and he had demonstrated the human capacity to adapt. Now the environment itself would test him, and he would meet it as he had met everything else, with clarity, thought, and resilience. "Stand in the center," Xyrathal commanded, her tone soft but unyielding. "The trial begins now." It was designed to challenge his mind, his perception, his ability to remain calm under conditions he could not control. The Queen remained at the edge of the room, observing silently. Ilias' eyes adjusted to the shifting light, and he began to move deliberately, testing the floor with cautious steps, analyzing the patterns that shifted around him. He realized that the room was a kind of puzzle, a test not of strength, but of thought, endurance, and adaptability. Hours passed in careful, deliberate observation. Ilias noted that the patterns responded to his movements, shifting slightly with every step he took. He tested the limits of the floor, the walls, and the illusions cast by the light. Each time he made an error, misjudging distance, stepping incorrectly, or misreading the patterns, the room responded, correcting him, adjusting the environment subtly to continue the challenge. "You are persistent," Xyrathal said finally, breaking the silence. "Most creatures would fail quickly, give up, or panic. You endure and adapt. This is unusual human." He realized that every motion, every choice was being observed, not only by Xyrathal, but by the environment itself, an extension of her will. "You think this is only a test of endurance," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the chamber. "But it is also a test of intellect, creativity, and insight. You must not only survive, you must understand." Understanding, he realized, would be the key. The room was more than a puzzle. It was a lesson, a mirror reflecting his own mind, his own perceptions, his ability to remain rational under pressure. He adjusted his focus, allowing his mind to separate observation from action, analysis from instinct. Time seemed to stretch as he moved through the shifting patterns, stepping carefully, observing the light, responding to the subtle changes in the environment. Each step required thought, patience, and deliberate attention. He relied on his knowledge of geometry, physics, and human intuition, combined with the lessons he had learned in training. Remain calm, observe carefully, adapt quickly. "You are clever," Xyrathal said softly. "Not only patient, but insightful. You anticipate, you calculate, you respond. Few have done this before. We do not rely on strength alone, nor on instinct. We rely on mind, on thought, on endurance." The hum beneath the floor shifted in pitch and intensity, signaling changes that Ilias had to perceive and respond to quickly. Hours passed, yet he remained composed. He stumbled occasionally, misjudged distance, or misread a pattern, but he adapted, corrected, and continued. Each challenge revealed not only the room's design, but his own capacity to endure, to think, and to respond under pressure. "You are remarkable," Xyrathal said finally, stepping closer. Her gaze was intense, her silver eyes reflecting patterns of light that shifted with every subtle movement of her body. "Most species would have succumbed long ago, overwhelmed by fear, confusion, or exhaustion. You persist. Survival is not measured in strength, but in persistence, adaptation, and understanding." The room itself, a creation of her will, was no match for his determination. "You do not merely survive," she said, her voice quiet, reflective. "You understand, that is unexpected. Most creatures react, respond, and fail. You learn while enduring. That is not weakness, that is strength. Humans have learned that survival is not always about power, but about intelligence, patience, and adaptability. Even the smallest, weakest among us can endure if the mind remains free and focused." Every step, every choice, every observation reflected the core of human endurance. He was no longer reacting instinctively. He was thinking, anticipating, learning. "You teach even in silence," Xyrathal said softly. "I have not encountered such resilience in any species I have studied. Perhaps I have underestimated humans." But survival is not about being underestimated. It is about being prepared, being observant, and refusing to break under pressure. That is what humans endure. That is what humans survive. Ilias' body grew tired, but his mind remained alert, focused on the patterns, the shifts, the subtle cues that the room and the queen offered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chamber fell silent. The shifting lights and vibrations ceased. The illusions dissolved. The floor hummed softly, a quiet rhythm that signaled the end of the trial. Ilias stood in the center of the room, calm, composed, and aware. Xyrathal approached him, her gaze soft, her posture relaxed. "You have endured," she said. "Not only the night, not only the challenges of the room, but the trial itself. You have adapted, observed, and learned. You have shown a resilience I did not expect." "It is what humans do," he said. "We endure, we adapt, we survive, not through force, not through dominance, but through understanding, persistence, and determination. Perhaps humans are not as fragile as my empire assumed. Perhaps there is value in endurance, intelligence, and adaptability. Perhaps your kind is worthy of consideration, not merely observation." The queen had seen the core of humanity. Not weapons, not aggression, not dominance, but the ability to endure, adapt, and survive against impossible odds. The door remained locked, but it no longer mattered. The trial was not about confinement. It was about revelation, understanding, and the quiet power of the human spirit. And Ilias' ward had passed, not through force, not through defiance, but through calm observation, persistence, and the unwavering strength of human endurance. The night had been long. The trial had been difficult. But the first true lesson was clear. Humans endure, and through endurance they teach, they survive, and they claim respect, even from the most powerful sovereigns in the galaxy. The room had grown still, the echoes of the trial lingering in the soft hum beneath the floor. Ilias' ward stood in the center, calm but alert, as Xyrathal paced slowly along the walls. For hours he had endured the shifting illusions, the subtle challenges of gravity and light, the complex puzzle of perception the queen had created. And yet, for the first time, he noticed something different. Xyrathal was no longer observing with the cold precision of a ruler testing a subject. She was listening, reflecting, questioning. "You have survived," she said finally, her voice soft and almost thoughtful. "But endurance alone does not answer all questions. You have adapted, observed, learned. Yet there is something more, something I cannot measure in my usual ways. Humans survive not because we are physically superior, but because we think, adapt, and cooperate. That is a power many cannot measure. Yet you speak of cooperation as strength. How can that be? Understanding, cooperation, and respect, these endure. I assumed fragility, I assumed weakness. But you show a strength I cannot easily define. It is not physical, not immediate, but enduring. Humans have survived countless threats, countless disasters because we do not give up. We adapt, we endure. That is why we are here, why we reach for the stars, and why we survive where others might fall." Elias felt it instinctively and adjusted his stance, his senses alert, ready for anything. But he sensed no threat, only curiosity, a desire to understand. "You speak of survival, yet your species is flawed," Xyrathal said. "You fight wars, destroy, betray. You are not perfect. How do you claim such endurance when history is full of failure?" Humans learn from mistakes. Every disaster, every failure, every obstacle is an opportunity to adapt, improve, and grow stronger. We endure not because we are perfect, but because we refuse to stop, because we refuse to surrender to fear or impossibility. That is our power. "And yet," she said, "I have ruled empires, observed countless species. Most act out of instinct, fear, or survival. Few think, few adapt with such clarity. You are unusual. We survive not because we are strongest, but because we refuse to give up, because we learn, and because we work together. That is what humans endure." She moved closer, lowering herself slightly to his level, a gesture of intent rather than intimidation. "I have ruled through fear and control," she said quietly. "Yet I sense that humans require something different, not dominance, not obedience. You survive through thought, adaptation, and cooperation. Is that your choice or your nature?" "It is our nature to endure, but it is also a choice. Every human chooses to face challenges, to learn, to adapt. We choose to survive, and we choose how we act when we do. That is why humans are resilient, not only physically, but in spirit." She had prepared challenges to measure his strength, his mind, his patience. And yet all of that had been answered not through aggression or fear, but through calm observation, endurance, and insight. "Perhaps I have been blind," she said softly. "I have assumed that control and power define strength, but you show me another kind. One that endures without dominance, that survives without fear, that teaches without command." Elias could feel the subtle energy that had always responded to Xyrathal's presence, yet it no longer felt like a test. It felt like a space of reflection, where two beings from different worlds could exchange understanding, observation, and insight. "You endure not only the room, not only the trial, but the very purpose of my observation," Xyrathal said finally. "Most creatures would fail long before this. Yet you endure with clarity, thought, and purpose. That is rare, remarkable. That is what allows us to survive, to grow, and to reach beyond what seems possible. That is different from any species I have encountered." She stepped closer, her presence calm, deliberate, and unthreatening. "Perhaps there is value in learning from such endurance," she said softly. "Perhaps there is more to your species than I assumed. Perhaps humans are not fragile, not weak, but capable of strength far beyond what I measured before. Strength is not always measured by force or dominance. It is measured by the will to persist, to learn, to adapt, and to survive. That is why humans endure. That is why we grow. That is why we survive where others fail." It had become a dialogue, a reflection, a lesson shared without words but fully understood. Elias had shown the queen not only human endurance, but human insight, resilience, and the quiet power of choice. "You teach even without intending to," Xyrathal said finally. "I have observed countless species, countless trials, and yet you teach through endurance, through thought, through choice. That is unexpected. That is remarkable. Not because of power, not because of weapons, but because of spirit. Because of endurance, because of choice, because of insight. Perhaps humanity has shown me a strength I had never imagined. Not through force, not through defiance, not through aggression, but through calm endurance, thought, and understanding, humanity had earned recognition." For the first time, the queen stepped fully closer, her presence no longer commanding, but observing, listening, reflecting. "You endure," she said softly. And in that endurance, you teach me, and perhaps even my empire, a lesson of value beyond control or dominance. And he had shown that humans, small and fragile though they might appear, could demonstrate a strength far beyond what even the most powerful beings could measure. The night was far from over, but the bond had been formed. The Queen's curiosity had turned to respect. The trial had revealed not just endurance, but understanding. And for Elia's ward, that was the true measure of human strength: to endure, to teach, and to inspire even in the most impossible circumstances. The pale light of the planet had shifted once more, signaling the approach of a new cycle. Elia's ward had spent what felt like an eternity in the chamber with Xyrathal, enduring trials, observing and exchanging words that carried more weight than any weapon or threat. Now, for the first time, he sensed a subtle change in the room, in the Queen, in the very air around him. Something had shifted, something beyond observation or endurance. Xyrathal stood quietly, her silver scales reflecting the soft light, her gaze thoughtful rather than commanding. For hours she had watched, questioned, and listened. She had challenged him, not with physical tests, but with the subtle complexities of her chamber, her environment, and her expectations. Yet Elias had persisted, adapted, and demonstrated a resilience that she could not ignore. "The cycle ends soon," she said softly, her voice carrying a calm authority. "And with it, this night will conclude. Tell me, human, do you feel you have understood me as I have observed you? And I hope that, in turn, you have learned about humanity, about our endurance, our thought, and our ability to adapt. That is what humans endure, that is what humans survive, and that is what humans teach. Few have ever demonstrated such clarity, patience, and persistence. You have taught me that strength is not always measured by power or fear, but by endurance, thought, and choice. Perhaps I underestimated your species. We rely on observation, adaptation, and persistence. That is how we survive, how we endure, and how we demonstrate strength even in impossible circumstances." He felt readiness, anticipation, and calm confidence. The trial had revealed much, and now its conclusion seemed near. "You have endured," Xyrathal said finally, her voice steady. "And in your endurance, you have revealed to me the nature of your species. Humans are not fragile nor insignificant. You persist, adapt, and survive in ways that few others can comprehend. That is remarkable." She moved slowly toward the center of the room, her presence calm yet commanding, a reflection of the respect she now held for the human before her. "And now," she said softly, "the door will open, but understand this, human, this night, this trial will not be forgotten. You have shown me that endurance is a power, a lesson, and a strength that cannot be measured by physicality alone." Light from the rest of the ship spilled in, but it felt different now, less threatening, less imposing, more like a space of mutual recognition than confinement. As the guards approached, expecting a broken human or a furious queen, they found neither. Elias stood calmly, a figure of quiet confidence and endurance, and Xyrathal remained by his side, her posture relaxed yet regal. She had observed, learned, and now acknowledged the human not as a subject, nor a challenge, but as an equal in insight, perseverance, and spirit. "You have passed," she said quietly, her voice carrying authority, curiosity, and respect all at once. "Not merely by surviving the chamber, but by demonstrating the essence of your species. Humanity is worthy of consideration, not underestimation. Not subjects, not threats, but equals. That is the lesson you leave here tonight." Then, with a subtle gesture of her hand, she signaled the guards to step back. "Let it be known," she said, her voice carrying throughout the chamber, "that humans are not to be underestimated. Their endurance is strength, their persistence is power, and their insight is a lesson worthy of respect." The night had been long, the chamber challenging, the trial intense. Yet he had endured, adapted, and demonstrated the human spirit, resilient, intelligent, and unyielding. The Queen's acknowledgement was a validation, not of dominance, but of understanding. As they moved together through the corridor, the Queen finally spoke more openly, her voice less formal, more reflective. "I have ruled for cycles longer than you can imagine," she said. "And yet tonight I have learned something new. Humans endure in ways I did not expect. Their persistence, thought, and choice are a strength unlike any I have encountered. I see now that my empire could learn much from such endurance." She spoke not as a ruler commanding a subject, but as a being reflecting on insight, observation, and understanding. It was a rare openness, one that few would expect from a sovereign of her power. "You speak of endurance as choice," she continued, "and I see that in you. You do not act from instinct alone, nor from fear, nor from desire for favor. You act from reason, understanding, and persistence. That is a power my empire has rarely seen, yet I must now acknowledge it. That choice allows growth and understanding. That is why humans endure. They were curious, observing the subtle shift in the queen's demeanor, the quiet confidence of the human who had endured and taught without aggression. Xyrathal gestured toward Elias, her presence commanding yet calm. "Let all who witness this night understand," she said, "that humanity is worthy of respect. Not through weapons, not through dominance, not through fear, but through endurance, intelligence, and persistence. That is the essence of their strength. That is the lesson of the night." Humanity had endured, adapted, and demonstrated a quiet, unyielding power that could not be measured by size, age, or weaponry. The queen's eyes softened as she regarded him one final time. "You have endured," she said, "and in doing so you have revealed something far greater than any challenge could test. Humanity is not fragile. Humanity is not weak. Humanity endures, and through that endurance it teaches, survives, and inspires. That is our strength, and that is why we endure." It had become a bridge of understanding, a moment of mutual recognition between two beings from entirely different worlds. As the light of the planet's cycle brightened further, Elias realized that this night, this chamber, this trial had revealed something far greater than endurance alone. It had revealed the essence of humanity: intelligence, patience, adaptation, and persistence. It had shown that even the smallest, weakest, or most underestimated species could leave an impact far greater than force or fear. The queen gestured toward the exit once more. "Go now," she said. "Return to your people, human, but understand this. Your endurance has left a mark not only on me, but on the perception of your species throughout my empire. Humanity is no longer to be underestimated." Yet the lessons of endurance, insight, and persistence would remain, not just in him, but in the recognition humanity had earned. As he stepped back into the broader corridors of the ship, the hum of the engines no longer felt imposing, the guards no longer threatening. The queen had seen, the empire had learned, humanity had endured. And in the quiet strength of that endurance, Elias realized a truth he would carry forever. Humans may be small, fleeting, and fragile in appearance, but in spirit, in mind, and in choice, they were a force that could never be contained, never underestimated, and never broken. The night had ended. The chamber door had opened. But the story of human endurance had only begun, and it would echo across the stars, remembered, respected, and feared, not for its weapons, not for its power, but for the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit.